Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today I think this is now part 6 of this leather and metal harness tutorial. I think we might get quite far today if we really put in the work. I don't know if it will be completed, but the main thing I want to complete today is get everything. We worked a bit on the depth of this and bring that depth into the surrounding areas as well and start finalizing some details. Because we've now filled in major areas, it's just some of the metal at the top here that still needs filling in. But we've mainly covered all our areas. It's just the stitching and the rivets. But we've done our basic work. We can kind of now start playing with the details and the more nitty-gritty, really important stuff. So I'm going to start from the left side, work my way to the right. Hopefully keep that. I might play around, switch around, depending on how I'm feeling. So yeah, let's get stuck in with it and yeah. Okay, so I'm going to start with these leather straps. And let me just pull up my reference. Haven't done that yet. There we go. So I'm going to kind of work metal and leather together on this side. Also do some of the stitching work, because we've still got some metal that is untouched right at the top there. So I've got a whole bunch of pencils next to me. Let me just see which one. I'm going to start. I can't remember what was the deepest we went on this side. So I'm going to keep a 2B close and let's go up to 4B as well, just in case. And then obviously, since we've now got something deeper, once we end, I think we went 7B and 8B here. I'm not going to do that yet for the leather. Maybe, just maybe, I'll just keep an 8B close. Give that a sharpen. HB pencil as well, and then an F pencil. Where's an F pencil? Just a smaller one. There we go. So I gave that a sharpen. So let's start with the 2B first. If that doesn't work, I'll go up to the 4B. So yeah, I'm going to start like I always do with any type of layering, start with my darkest points. It's just a lot easier for me to kind of restart getting back into the groove of a drawing. So I'm just going to start deepening up our darkest shadows. And then with these stages, I'll start to notice maybe I went too deep on certain areas. So I'll just clean it up. For this leather, for the metal, it's similar depth to the shadows in the leather. So I'm going to keep to a 2B for now. Once I start getting this type of depth all over, then I can start going in with my darker pencils, and then I would know how light I can make my highlights. So I truly like to take my time in building up that depth in a drawing. It just helps me prevent mistakes. Because I do tend to notice different things the more I work on a drawing. So it's just a lot easier for me to give myself time to familiarize myself with everything, basically. So now I'm going to actually should probably also get a 2H close, just for the lighter bits in the metal. So you'll treat this metal like you've done all the other metal pieces, but as it's kind of next to a blank space, you do want to give it a slight outline just to define it. And that's why I choose, you can, if you've got a grade higher than the 2H, like a 4H or even higher than that, you can use those as well. It also helps to crisp up outlines of even darker areas. So back in with my 2B. I'm just going to also give that a blend. And I'm going to take my HB just to start working on these metal bits. So just focusing on the darkest areas, you'll treat these the same. You'll pick your major, these are out of focus, so you've only got the major shadows and highlights to work with anyways, which makes it a lot easier. But just putting in the darkest bits first. And I'll probably not go in with powder just yet, just to keep it still a little bit crisp. Still just using my HB, and I just kind of deepened up the strap below it. And because we're using soft layers, you can use your lower Bs to even still build up depth after all of the pencil we've already put down. So it makes it a lot easier that you don't need to constantly step up to get a result, which I quite like. you give yourself a lot more room and a lot more pencils to play with if you keep it to softer layers and patiently build up to the depth needed. Then you can play around with the whole range and you don't need to constantly go up pencils to build depth. Just going to take my 2H and just clean up these layers, kind of even them out. And I'm going to go back, I'm actually going to use my F pencil just to deepen up this over here. So very slight pressure, you don't need to use a lot. I'm just going in to the metal clasp as well, that's visible, just to add a little bit more interest basically. Just going to take 2B and then 2H. So I like to use the 2H to blend out, even an F pencil to blend out B pencils. Just when you use them very light, the grain of the paper still comes through. So the 2H just fills in that gap basically. Taking my mono eraser to put in some highlights, and then I'm just going to blend it out. This is an F pencil that I'm currently using. Just still building up the depth. To quickly clean up this gap here. And this just also helps to crisp up outlines. Just constantly clean your areas, especially in between as well. Back in with my F pencil. Moving down, just taking our time. Just filling in that gap with my 2H. I'm going to take my mono eraser and add a slight little highlight line here at the bottom of this strap. And also just check the top one as well. Here we go. So you must always remember, once you add more depth, you need to go in and crisp up your highlights as well. You don't need to do the one and then directly the other, but it's nice to keep track of whether or not your values are still making sense once you add both. Then you can see maybe this highlight needs more depth, or this depth needs more highlight. Or you need to mute out certain values to make more sense to where the object is placed within the whole drawing. But that becomes a lot easier once the whole drawing is kind of on the same level again. So you kind of build up the steps to the new value level for your drawing. And then you assess and see, okay, which areas need more work, which areas are fine, maybe just a touch of detail here and there. Then it becomes a lot easier to assess whether or not your highlights and your shadows make sense together, whether or not one is, if say for instance you've got a very bright highlight right in the background object of your drawing, it's going to kind of pull the viewer's eye. And because that highlight is not supposed to be there, then you've kind of over highlighted that area, and you need to tone it down and mute it down for it to make sense for where that object is placed within the space of the drawing. So I kind of like to see it as kind of a stairwell. Each floor is a different kind of completion level of the drawing, where you kind of use to take time to assess whether or not everything still makes sense within the complete kind of view. And then when you view it from a distance, or like me, I can see it in kind of the OBS studio. So I can see it top down, how it all looks together, which really helps to assess whether or not you're still on the right track and everything still makes sense. So add both shadows and highlights as you go, and then you can, once everything has kind of the same level of depth and highlight, you can see whether or not some needs to be more bright, more dark, or more muted and more similar in values. Because like these highlights, once everything is completed, might be too light for the area. It might be very similar in kind of value to something that's in the foreground. Then I would need to kind of go over it and mute it out more, maybe deepen it up more. So that's kind of just what I am getting at. Right, so I'm going to take the 4B and we're going to go back into this strap. So I just want to add some, you don't have to do this, but just for me in some of the areas, just add maybe a touch more depth. It's not going to be very visible to you, but it's those very slight little kind of additions that does add at the end. It all adds up in the end. Okay, so now we're going to go into this strap right here. This one has got some texture to it at this top, and its values of its color is darker, but the values are similar to this strap right here at the back. So I'm just going to keep my 4B in hand. Very slight pressure, just more using circular motions, and I'm going to start adding the depth. And obviously this highlight where the stitching is going to become muted, so it's just now a lot easier to kind of see where everything should be going. So I'm keeping the point nice and sharp, using the point to my advantage, especially in these kind of where the stitching is, makes that little line of shadow. It just makes it easier. The Faber-Castells keep their points very nicely, especially on their B pencils, as they're not as soft as the Staedtlers and the Cretacolors. So I'm just taking my time to build all of this up. And also remember, you are working in a smaller area, so it's just a lot easier when you do put a little bit more patience to it to not go over everything and maybe make a mistake. That's going to be a lot harder to correct later on. So the texture stops about halfway down the strap. It's not as textured as two of the other straps. I think this one is very textured, and obviously this one right here. This one's texture is going to be the easiest because it's the largest area and there's quite a lot of light and shadow to work with. This one is very simple because it's not as visible and it's not as strong, it's not as textured, it's not as worn, and the deeper kind of color of the strap makes it a bit kinder to draw, basically. So I'm going to use this F pencil. This highlight line is a lot smaller than what we've drawn it here. And since it's slightly fuzzy, I'm going to take an F pencil. Just make sure it's sharp. And I'm going to go on the top. So I'm going to obstruct your view a little. And just crisp it up and also go where the 4B was. So with these types of small details where you want a very slight highlight line, I will do most of the work in the depth needed, and then I'll take a F or 2H very sharp point and just kind of drag that depth to where I need it, rather than using the softer tip of the B pencil, and also because it picks up the grain of the paper. It just makes it a lot easier to use the harder pencils. And because it's such a small area, you're not really going to notice that you use for that really last little bit of kind of closing the gap that you used a lower grade. So I'm just keeping my F pencil in hand. Definitely still need to do some cleaning up here by the metal, but that will become easier once we filled in that space. So these types of things are very, very final details. It's your very last kind of additions to your drawing. And because we're doing so much layering, it's going to be a lot easier to remove the pencils from those areas. So I'm going to go to B. Straighten up this. You can see how easily that little piece got removed with my mono eraser. I didn't even need to put in a lot of effort to correct kind of a mistake or maybe an error in the shape. Just a lot easier, but I actually think, yeah, this, it obviously does, I think it adds a lot of time to actually drawing hours, but I think we need to, I would love to have artists just, obviously you always see that those Instagram videos, oh, this took 100 hours, this took X amount of hours. it's very impressive. It's once you get like triple digits, it's like, oh, okay, that's a lot of hours. But you can spend a lot of time even on a smaller drawing. You don't need to think, oh, the smaller the drawing, the less time. Obviously, it's going to take less time. But to put it in comparison, the snow leopard and the labby took roughly 20 hours for me, and that was A4 size. Now, to put that in perspective, I did an A3 horse tutorial about, what was it, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, maybe. That A3 drawing took less than 20 hours. To put that in perspective of how much kind of change happens in a few years' time, of how much time you start spending on smaller drawings because your technique changes, because your attention to detail changes. The more time you spend drawing, the more you refine your technique, the more you build the ability to add smaller and smaller and smaller details. The more you become capable of really packing in the details in smaller areas, really knowing how to create them and use the pencils to make those details appear in a smaller area. That obviously means you're going to add time because you're spending more time on the drawing. My fur technique has developed a lot over the past, I would say, exponentially grew in the last few years. And that all came with the development of my layering technique along with the powder and the mono erasers as well. And that just adds time. I mean, honestly, I spent so much time on the Labrador's fur, but that's just because I knew I could really go for the details and really get it to look the way I want it to look, even if it's an A4 drawing. So you kind of have to realize that if you do begin, your hours spent on a drawing is not going to look the same as someone who's done it for a lot longer. And you might be thinking, oh, but how could I have done an A4 in 6 hours where this person spent 20 on the same size drawing and even probably the same subject matter? It all becomes dependent on how much you can put in the drawing, how much you are capable of putting in the drawing, how much your technique has developed in such a way that you can add everything you see into the drawing, how you become capable of understanding how values are developed and created. And that all becomes, it starts to take time away. It starts to, you really are able to get stuck in more, understand how certain details need certain steps and certain textures need certain steps to create a lifelike version of it on paper. So that only kind of develops the more you do it and the time you put in. So more time you put in will result in more time spent drawing, obviously. I hope this makes sense. So drawing like this for this size is taking a lot longer than it would a few years ago for me, that it would have been able to do an A3 drawing. Which becomes terrifying once you think of it, really. How much you can start putting into a smaller area. How much more you notice things. You do become more efficient in drawing, but you also become a lot better at other things which take more time. So in the end, I think it's very important to not be as time bound, or kind of tell yourself, okay, this drawing is going to take X amount of hours and that's what I'm kind of bargaining for. Because I've realized you might do one thing. Say for instance, I love horses, so there are certain types of horse drawings that take a lot longer than others. It depends on the lighting, it depends on the tack, it depends on, does it have long hair, does it have braids, you know, what's the coat color, does it have spots? There's a whole plethora of things. And sometimes certain drawings just take more time. They're just seemingly simple, yet once you start going, it just takes a lot longer. So for instance, the Labrador, because it had such beautiful contrast and the fur that moved, it's seemingly simple because it's short hair. It is a lot simpler to draw, but because of the way the fur moves and the highlights and the depth and the shadows and the really nice lighting, it takes a lot of time for you to develop that same feel on paper. So don't just think because a certain subject has simpler kind of elements that it's going to take less time than another one. I have learned that over the course of what's it now been? It's been like 11 years since I started kind of drawing like this. And even the size, it's deceiving, it really is. I mean, I haven't timed myself on an A5 drawing in a while. I could easily do that in a couple of hours, easily. But I have no idea how much I now can kind of squeeze into an A5. I still want to do an A5 Sassy Pony tutorial. Those were my bread and butter at one point. They were really fun to draw. So yeah, it's also another measure of kind of your development. Is don't necessarily think because it takes you longer that you've become better. You might just be struggling with a new texture or a new subject matter. But once you've kind of noticed that change in something you draw very often, and you can actually see the visible difference, that's when it becomes also very interesting, because it's not always the visible difference that shows that you've developed in your skill. It's oftentimes the time it takes. I think art is a bit dissimilar in that way. Say for instance you're a tradesperson. I think when you become more skilled in a trade, I think you do it more efficiently and quicker, but your work is of a lot better quality. Say for instance of someone that's starting out, and they obviously do take longer because they're not as used to it. Art, I think, kind of follows a different pattern. It depends obviously on the type of art you do, but I think realism kind of works in the opposite way. That the more efficient you become at it, you obviously start drawing more complex subjects, you start drawing more complex materials, maybe you go larger in your subject matter or your drawings. This is an H pencil, by the way. You do take longer, but if you were to do that same subject and materials or difficult thing to draw if you were, say, a beginner. It would take maybe longer. You might give up. You might not reach the same level of details. You might struggle just to even figure out how to draw whatever you're seeing, because that's kind of the whole crux of the thing, really, is to figure out how to realistically use your pencils and your materials to create what you see. And it's not as simple. It's not as simple as it looks. It might seem very... You see a value, you recreate the value. It's on paper, it's very simple, but it's really not. It's a lot more difficult than it looks. So yeah. So basically what I'm saying is, I think do on certain things take note of the time it takes you to complete a drawing, especially when you want to compare it to something similar you did maybe a few years ago. But don't always just bargain on that, because it's gonna take a lot longer. It truly is. And you need to, I feel, spend the time, be patient, kind of just draw, do the drawing, complete the drawing until you feel you can no longer add to this drawing. You can no longer use your skill set to further the drawing along, even though you might notice that you've maybe missed details or the texture's not quite there. But once you kind of realize that this is as far as my skill allows me, then that drawing is complete. And obviously the more you develop it, the farther you can take that drawing. Yes, because certain textures, the more you do it, the quicker you can put them in. But I've noticed now that I'm actively starting to draw things that are difficult, that are going to be time consuming, that are going to be challenging. Challenging, it's it's actually quite fun. I do like the challenge. It's sort of daunting, but there's a sort of excitement attached to it as well. To start drawing things that you are unfamiliar with, you know? And that's also a way to test your skill, is to pick a completely different subject matter or texture and kind of see, you know, your problem solving skills. And see how you can figure it out. Because that's basically just what it is, really. Is problem solving. It's very much a trial and error type of thing. Okay. So I'm still using my H pencil. I'm kind of filling in gaps. I haven't done a lot of highlight work. Just once I kind of go off topic, I start to go autopilot, then I don't really know if I'm doing anything significant. So I'm just taking this H pencil. This stitching is not really individual stitching. You can see some of the individual stuff, but it's very out of focus and blurred out. So you don't necessarily need to create a line for each. You can be very haphazard. It doesn't need to be precise. Just make sure that you kind of keep them same size if we do start adding little kind of lines to show that there is different stitchings or different kind of little things there. And I don't do straight lines, I kind of curve them. So this is one of those things, it's not a very defined repeating pattern, so you can kind of just add them. You can treat them like the leather, the weathering of the leather, like we did with this strap here for the last part. You kind of pick your main ones, put them in roughly the area where they should be, and then you kind of just look at the reference every now and then to see how they behave with your light source, and then you just kind of just put them in. It's one of those very nice textures where you don't really need to follow the reference exactly. And sometimes just break up that line will kind of take away from the sharpness of the highlights, which is mainly how I do the stitching anyways, because I can't be bothered to do it. Maybe one day I'll be bothered to do it very precisely, but in these types of size drawings it's really not necessary. Okie dokie. I'm just going to take a brush. I think there's enough powder on here. Yeah, there is. So I'm just going to go over this metal and with the powder that's already on the brush. If you've got a clean brush, take a very small amount of powder, tap off almost like you've not added powder, and just give that a wash, just to give it a kind of a grey, just to take away that white of the paper. So now I'll just mono eraser. So now I'm just taking the mono eraser and just cleaning up. There we go. Okay, now we're going to kind of move on to the stitching. I don't give my H pencil another sharpen, actually. Just going to first use the 4B in here and just add the depth. I will probably have to make this darker. I have a feeling that I might have to do that. But that's the type of things that you maybe start noticing once you go through the drawing, that I can absolutely go dark in this area, definitely. But those are the type of things you start making mental notes of, as maybe certain areas will start to look a lot lighter than they should be, because I've only used kind of a 4B in these areas, and I still got like all the way up to a 9B that I can use. So just, it's kind of one of those mental notes that you need to be aware of, is that you've still got a lot of value and depth to play with. Which is a nice, I kind of like that thought that we've still got a ton of depth we can add. And that's probably one of my favorite parts, is once you start adding those really dark shadows, it really brings to life the drawing for me. It really kind of amplifies the shape and the shadows and really starts giving life to it. I think me personally, that's just probably because I really like, I've always been drawn to black and white photos, those really contrasted in your face black and white photos. So I do quite like a very, very deep something. It's always satisfying to add. Okay, so now I'm going to take my H pencil and the stitching. The stitching, especially here, it's a bit out of focus. It's going to be, I would say, the main challenge of the drawing is how do you show, you're going to treat it almost like a hair braid in that type of shading, where you've got your little shadow, highlight, shadow, shadow, highlight, shadow. Very similar in that regard, but obviously if you look at your reference, it's not as visibly noticeable. It's not that in your face shadow, highlight, shadow. In some of the white parts it is. This is going to be a lot more prevalent right here, but here it's going to almost have to look more of a muted. So you're going to play around more with your F's, your H, maybe up to an B or 2B, but I think even that will maybe push it to a place where it's not supposed to go. So my thing is, we're going to put in kind of the basic shapes. Then you're going to use a lot of powder to generally give a general, because it's obviously starts out in the shadows here, so you're going to add your shadowed kind of values, and then it's going to get lighter to the front. So we're going to do that first, and then we're going to kind of define out the stitching. So I'm going to stick in this area, work on the metal, and the stitching here at the bottom, you would notice is a lot more, has a lot more depth, and really that shadow, highlight, shadow, especially in this top white part of the stitching, than it does its counterpart right here at the top. So I probably won't be talking a lot during this, but I'm going to stick with my H for the beginning, and then I will let you know once I kind of switch it up. So if you've already got your stitching in and it's very visible, not like me, just random circles and a shape, then obviously you can just fast forward to where I'm starting the shading bit. So I can probably now already, the way I'm reading it out, so I'm going to define my shapes, and then I'm going to use powder first, and then I'm going to go back in and redefine the shapes and start adding. I think I'm going to stick to the H pencil for now, maybe go up to an F in these kind of darker bits. So it starts triangles kind of here at the top. It's just, I've always find repeating patterns very difficult to draw. I don't know why. My eye kind of gets confused and overwhelmed with the repeating patterns. There's one drawing I did, there's a time lapse of it on the channel way back. It's of a Frisian with a very intricate braided bridle. Oh, that was an absolute nightmare. I want to find something similar to draw, but that reference was a DeviantArt reference, so I can't really use it as a tutorial on the channel. I might, sure, I'll probably find somewhere something similar, because that's a very interesting kind of leather. I've got leather references with the kind of those western saddles with the patterns on it, which I think is going to be really fun to draw. A challenge for me. I can already tell it's going to be a challenge for me because of the repeating patterns. But I really want to find, it's almost similar to this metal links type of thing, because here I kind of lose my mind completely. That's just, it's always been one of those things that I struggled with, is a pattern that repeats over an area. Especially one that's, it kind of, because you're working with organic type of subjects, or I do, in fact, it changes shape, and obviously the lighting starts playing a role also on how you view it. So I know this is a repeating kind of stitching pattern, but because it's got on this curve that moves away from you, it changes the shape ever so slightly. So it's kind of where my eye and brain is starting to compete with one another, but on what I know it is and how it actually looks like, type of thing. So this is kind of where I start to employ the negative spaces. And if it's not perfect your first try, then that's completely fine. I've already kind of accepted the fact that this will probably not be the best my first time, because that's just, I expect by now that this is not my area. Of kind of my easiest work. If I've got time to do it, then obviously it's much simpler. But this is just one of those things that are very much practice based. Just practicing kind of drawing these shapes, basically. So this is very much also where I'm going to rely on my shadows and highlights to help build up the shapes. Because that's where it becomes a little bit easier for me to put it all in. I'm just going to use the H pencil just to fill in this top part above the stitching. And I might just make it deeper so that I've got something more contrasted. And also this in the middle. So I'm going to take an HB just to do that. kind of using it as, like I said, negative space to help me out defining the shape and the pattern. I'm obviously not worried about adding an HB to this entire area at kind of the same value, because I can easily add a highlight back in or add some depth just to show a bit of difference. Just gonna just give that a blend. So now you can kind of see the value difference between something that's got a lot of B pencil to it and kind of the more grayish tone that an HB has. And just kind of you can see the very big difference in depth that a very flat one pencil makes compared to if you layer it with a whole different bunch of pencils. Okay, now the bottom part. Starts to flatten out here. To kind of change shape around the middle. So I'm not looking at the stitching themselves, I'm looking at that middle kind of channel between the two. Okay, that's already looking like something. So I'm just going to do the same here to the bottom parts. And this is what we added last time, and just as the same as in the leather, very easy to move previous layers due to the soft application. So very simple. It's makes life a lot easier when you don't have to worry about having to add highlights at the end. There you go. Okay. I'm just kind of adding a little bit more kind of pencil marks, because I'm going to go in with powder now and start developing the values of the overall area. So it's going to look a bit sloppy, but nothing that some pencils and the highlights won't be able to kind of rectify in the end. Okay, so I'm going to use my soft bristle brush. Really tap off the excess. And I'm just going to give a wash to the whole thing first. And kind of go over this area as well. There we go. So I'm going to take a bit more, tap off the excess, and I'm going to focus mainly just here at this top part. So now you can see it's going from dark to light, dark to light. That's deceiving, so you're just going to add a little bit of a, there we go. Now I'm going to take, let me just quickly, 4B pencil. Define, because this is all in the shadows. So I'm just going to take the 4B and just add a little bit of depth. As well in this middle little channel as well. That's just for start. We're not going to do it all the way just yet. Now I'm going to take my HB pencil. And we're going to further kind of define what's going on here. It's going to look a bit harsh in the beginning, but you kind of have to just trust the process. Trying very hard to just keep the pattern in mind of how it works. All just basically a bunch of diamond shapes. Actually going to use my mono eraser instead. Just, if one method doesn't work, just switch it up, because there's always kind of a better way to visually kind of achieve what you want, to make it easier for you to understand what you're drawing, just to help with, especially with me, with these repeating patterns. Okay, that's a lot easier. So now I'm going in with my HB. And adding kind of the defining lines for the red part. Obviously the size is not going to be correct just yet, but once we just get the basic, there we go, that's a little bit better. Now I'm kind of starting to see the pattern. You've obviously, it's very stiff and not correct looking, but that's just, we kind of got to work with that. With your shadows and your highlights, you kind of build that shape. So just going to keep that in mind. Take my mono eraser and just even more define our little white part of the stitching. It's making a lot more sense now. And then we're just going to do the same at this bottom one. There we go. Go in with an F pencil. If you hear anything in the background, it's just the cat. She woke me up at like 4:30 this morning, playing with a toy under the door, which is just fantastic. There you go. Okie dokie. So I'm going to take the brush again. I'm not going to stick with this continuously till I get it right. I'm going to kind of move along and come back to it. As I don't want to kind of get frustrated. So we're going to now move on to the metal links next to it. I'm going to take my mono eraser first. And look at the shadows. Not the shadows. The highlights. They are. Because the powder's kind of taken away some of that crisp kind of defining of the shapes. You're just gonna have to spend some time to bring that back. And that's completely kind of the risk you take with the powder. I actually don't really mind it. This is just my F pencil. I'm just going to quickly, for these shapes, then we can define these metal bits here at the bottom. I'm going to use soft pressure just for now. There we go. Like I said, I don't mind the powder kind of taking away some of the crispness of the shape. It's still slightly visible to me, and it should be still to you. So you shouldn't have a problem with kind of bringing it back. And still be able to kind of see your guidelines or what you did underneath. So I'm just taking the F pencil, working around the highlights, not using a lot of pressure, kind of keeping it still soft. So this one here. And even when you start to add these kind of similar shadowed values, you're going to also kind of battle with sometimes losing the shape. So you've got to be a bit more strategic in what you add first and then what you add later on. So I'm going to ignore kind of what's in the negative spaces first, and focus only on getting the metals values right, and then you can fill in right at the end. I'll fill in what's going on in the gaps, because if you start filling that in now, you're going to definitely struggle to keep kind of the shapes defined and knowing where you are and what you're busy with. This is quite out of focus, so I'm just going to quickly add in some shapes. And these are the types of details that I only bother with until the end. Right, so now I'm going to move back to the left to work on some of these straps. So I'm going to take, let's start with the 4B. I'm going to start here right at the bottom first. So I'm going to take my 4B, this still has a nice sharp point. And only focusing on the darkest areas. Remember, this is still like 4 grades lower than the depth we can still add. So this, what we're adding now, is not kind of the final depth, but you're definitely starting to bring up the values to where it's going to be. And you're starting to kind of define, add more difference basically to these areas. Whereas in those initial layers, it's very similar. Maybe here and there add the depth to define the shapes. But your values are very in the same kind of family. They're not very different, especially between the straps. It's very same. So now I'm gonna take my 2B pencil. So this strap has got texture. First going to bring up the values a little bit more before I start. Now you can start adding some of the texture in. Why not? Here I just feel the shape of the top strap is a bit shallow, so I'm going to bring it down a bit more. And yet again, you can just see how easily I removed the bottom layers to make that correction. Back in with my 2B still. Just going to fix up these. So once you start making adjustments, you just need to make sure that everything else still makes sense. So for these, I'm just going to go back in, take my F pencil, and when you do make adjustments, it might take some time to get it just right. Because I'm the macabre. So even my eyes with these lines plays a bit of tricks on me. There we go. So this is just my 2B, just going back in and defining. And then we need to add, there we go. Much more pleased with that. I'm going to take my HB and I'm just going to fix a bit of more straighter line. also fill in this bottom area. For B pencil. And just back in with your HB. This is the type of area where I'll maybe start to actually use the 8B. So this is my 8B pencil. I'm gonna add that shadow there. Also add that shadow. Also this one here. Shape should come more like this. That changes. Oh, that makes more sense. So it's completely fine if you've come this far in a drawing and realize, you know, that which you did in other drawing sessions does not completely make sense. And then just correct them. Even if it's the angle slightly off, or yeah, just the shape was a bit odd. So that's kind of, now you could have seen why I generally take the slow approach, is because I do tend to notice things the more I draw something. This is my 8B pencil again, so I'm just gonna that, and then here at the top also add that shadow. There we go. This is my HP pencil. So to be, I'm going to go into this metal. So you'll notice the shadow of the metal is darker than the shadow right next to it on this kind of curve of the metal strap. So it's a very subtle and slight difference. It's got a dark line that goes towards the corner with a sharp little dark shadow. But that's a very subtle difference in value. It's something that you kind of have to put in just to make sure that the shapes, it shows that it's something different. It's not the same piece. Obviously it's something that you build up towards, because that subtle differences in values, it does take a little bit of time to just, it's not just two grades of pencils different from one another. It's kind of more, you build up similar to a point and then you maybe add darker pencil to the one but not the other, just to get that difference. So this is an H pencil. And I'm very light pressure. Just going to use the H pencil to fill in kind of the entire piece. And I'm going to take a blending brush and just blend that out. It's going to look very similar to what's around it, but just bear with me. I'm going to take my 4B and working on the strap behind it, just going to deepen up all that kind of area. I'm going to take my HB and just kind of connect the two sides. I take my 2B again. We're just going to take it into the strap here. It's F. Once you get kind of that grainy look, I switch down to a harder pencil. And just blend that out. Okay, so I'm just gonna go blend that out again. Clean up my mono eraser. Start adding some highlights. So this highlight is a lot thicker than it should be. So I'm going to take my F pencil. I'm actually going to give it a sharpen before I do this, just so that I can get a nice sharp point. So you've got your defining shadow line, and then you've got something very, might take a little bit to get it right. There we go. Actually gonna angle was a bit oof. Okay, that's better. So you just fill in that bit again. There we go. So you've got your little highlight line, a darker kind of, you don't really need to add that little dark line right next to it. And then you've got your defining shadow underneath the strap. So I'm just going to take my 8B and just add a depth there. And then we've got our, keep the F pencil in hand. Just to add that line, then we're going to make another highlight. F pencil, just define that outline. Almost as if it's a shadow. Then we've got this bottom highlight. Because this metal part isn't very large, we obviously can't add every single detail. So I'm just switching between my F pencil and my mono eraser. And just do it same on the other visible part. I'm going to leave that as such for now. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to this little metal piece. To be 8B pencil, I'm just going to define that top shadow line as well as this one here and here at the bottom. Okay, so 2B pencil, gonna go lighter pressure, define that top edge. Then I'm actually gonna take, let's take the F pencil just to close the gap to that highlight right at the top. Then you can go in slightly darker with your 2B. Not all the way, just create like a defining line. Just define your edge here and here with your 2B pencil. It's too dark. There we go. So these are two separate pieces of metal on the side. So I'm still using the 2B. It's still making sense for this area. Okay. Take my F pencil. And just not very hard pressure, just use slight pressure to start adding in and defining more kind of spaces. Now I'm going to use a blending stump similar to what we did with this one and just blend in all the other areas. Now this might seem a bit kind of counterproductive, but I find that the highlights are a lot more crisp this way. I'm even going to take a brush, just brush over. Oopsie daisy. First, just going to clean up that. Okay. Start at the farthest end. Add a little highlight. That's a bit larger than it should be, but it's fine. You can easily fix that up. There we go. That's kind of roughly similar to that one. All I'm aiming for in these layers is to just really give that final kind of step ready before we do our final details. So this is just an HB pencil. To be and I'm just going to take my H, crisp up that line. I'm actually going to go straight in with my 8B pencil in this area. So here, for instance, it's a bit different. I also didn't work on this metal over here. But kind of your darker shadows in the metal itself rather than in the leather strap. So it's not always the same all over. And that just also brings interest to the drawing. So I'm going back in with my 2B. For this part, I'm going to take my F pencil. So you'll notice even in these layers, everything kind of looks fairly similar still, just with a lot more depth. And that's kind of just how it works. Well, the way I do it, that's just kind of still how it works. It just becomes a lot easier for me in the end to really define those last bits of details. When you are working in the metal, you'll have your harder pressure lines, and then you'll have your softer pressure kind of more shaded areas. So just kind of vary your pressure within the metal itself, that it's all not just the same. Just going to take a blending brush and just fill in this area which we reworked. Just take an HB, kind of just roughly go over. $2B pencil, no, first, this caught my eye, so I'm just going to take the F pencil and just kind of fill in that area. Having a full drawing with just the same texture and material can be quite kind of monotonous. It's kind of also the reason why I move through certain areas very quickly and why I forget to complete certain areas. It's just the sameness can be quite difficult, and also to show difference in those areas can also be quite a bit of a challenge. So just to keep my interest alive, I move through certain areas a lot quicker, because these straps to me are very similar, these, especially these front ones. So just, this is still just the 2H, not the 2H, the 2B. Actually gonna switch to an F for this part right here. You're gonna kind of keep it a bit lighter here in the middle where it hits the light source, or where the light source hits it. And then you're just gonna so you're gonna go over the area just at a lighter pressure. Just fill these in. So I'm going to move along. I'm going to start doing something else, just for a break from all the leather, and move on to this section right here, because this is kind of behind everything else. So you'll see that this is now a lot darker than we started. So we are aiming to have this kind of depth match this side. Obviously this side hits the light source more direct, it's more directly in the light source, so it will still be different, but you still have those elements of the same depth that happens here, you'll have on this side. So that's kind of where we are. We kind of started adding it right here at the bottom in some areas, so now we're going to just focus on this side and kind of start merging the two. Right, so I'm going to start here at the top, kind of this middle part of metal. I'm going to stick to my F pencil. I'm going to start at kind of what I deem these parts of metal are kind of in the shadows. They're beneath everything that's going on here. So I'm just going to start there. Going to obviously use lighter pressure than what we just used for all the metal, because we're still kind of in the beginning layers. So soft pressure, circular motions. I mean, this is a smooth surface, so we kind of want to keep that feel. In areas where there's differences in value, you just either add or use less pressure. So I'm just going through defining edges, kind of defining areas that I'm working on. Just going to take a blending stump and just blend that out. I'm also going to simultaneously kind of bring up the value in the wood next to it. I'm not gonna, you'll see there's sort of a grain visible. I'm not gonna pay attention to that just now. That's not important in the initial layers. Still just using my F pencil for this. And then to the wood piece, I'm just gonna add a even kind of layer of depth. And then just blend that out. Okay, so now I'm going to go in to B pencil. To the really darkest parts. Just now mono eraser. So some of these highlights is not going to make sense until everything is kind of completed and in. Because for instance here you've got reflections of the light bouncing off of the other metals surrounding it. So that's not going to kind of make sense until everything has got somewhat of their final values. Back in with me F pencil, so just take your time with kind of this area, because everything is very similar. If it wasn't for the highlights, you wouldn't be able to make out anything of what's going on here. So, like always, just focusing on my darkest areas and their shapes, just to define the areas even more. So I'm just, for every now and again, I'm going to take a blending stump just to do some of the work for me. in adding depth and shape to a certain space. And this will also kind of help give a different value, just to help discern between certain spaces. So I'm just continuing on through the metal links with my F pencil and just defining the shapes as we've done for all the other metal bits. And just making sure that they stand out from what's around them, and then that there's some kind of discernible feature that you can see where the depth is, where the defining kind of main kind of shadow line is. Yeah, like everything else we've done to this point when it comes to shading out the metal. So, very, very similar. You could have probably done this already along with the other sections that we've already completed. But that all just depends on whether or not you, like me, just draw all over the place, or whether or not you're a bit more systematic and finish areas as you start them. So I'm just going to take my blending stump and kind of just go over some of the more closer to where it disappears into the others. There we go. This is a 4B pencil. I'm going to start here at the darkest areas. Just going to fill in that white space. Not really important space. And also with the 4B, I'm going to go into the metal clasp as well. Not all the way to the edge, I'm going to start slightly away, because similar to all the others, I want to have a value difference in their deepest kind of parts. So, F pencil now for the lighter sections. And also just round out that shape. Clean it up a bit, it's a bit too straight. There we go. Just take the F pencil and create that defining line at the edge. Here. And then also down here, start adding the depth as well. So just use circular motions in these types of areas just to not have those lines. You'll still see the grain coming through as I'm not using very hard pressure, but I'm going to use that to my advantage, as this area does have some form of texture to it. But I'm just going to quickly move on and add depth there. Take the F pencil, fill in the white gap. Keep the 4B in hand. Start going around here. And just take the F pencil and kind of blend it out and smooth out the line. Just going to use my 4B in these rivets, focusing on not really everything, not being too precise. Just getting the general idea in. Still using my 4B. I'm going to deepen up this section. Just so that we can start playing more with contrast within the metal itself. That the surrounding areas also have a lot more depth to them. Just with light pressure adding the depth needed first. Then I'm going to take a blending stump, add powder, tap off the excess, and then just use that as well. Just to keep it smooth. and get rid of maybe some marks that you might have made. Not going to worry too much about adding the highlights to it just yet, as it's not actually that important yet. I'm also just going to take whatever's left. Kind of these wood areas. This is just my 4B pencil. Still going to use my 4B. Give it a quick sharpen. I'm going to go into the metal itself. Really focus a bit more on the darker areas. As we go around, just clean up the edges as well. I'm going to take my H pencil, I'm going to go back up here to the top. Add in those lines that you see first. some of the depth, and then with very light pressure, just fill that in. I'm going to take a slightly cleaner blending stump and just blend that all out. Okay, so this is back to my 4B pencil. Just gonna go back in and add some depth here and there. Very light pressure, I'm not really adding too much. So I'm kind of going everywhere with this, into the metal and the leather as well. And then I'm just gonna go over and add a slightly deeper layer on top of this woodish texture. And I'm gonna, after this, also use, similar to what I did up here, a blending stump with some powder. Then I don't have to use so much of my pencil, and the powder kind of just fills in the gaps as well. And it also gives a bit more of a deeper kind of look to it than what we would have gotten out of the pencil. And that just prevents us from having to go in with too hard of a pressure. H, we're just going to define our lines. define our shapes. Don't worry too much about it looking like an actual outline, as we're still kind of in the layering process. Also just use this opportunity with the 8 pencil to also add in some values and lines into these kind of unworked metal bits. Now this metal clasp thing is very bright and in the direct sunlight, but I'm kind of gonna just ignore that and kind of pretend that the light source is not that bright, just for now, and just kind of complete that kind of circle, kind of like a halo. Same here at the bottom. This is very bright and highlighted. I'm probably not going to keep it that way. Just as you add, just blend out those areas. And you don't have to use your pencil in the entire kind of section. Right, we're coming up to 3 hours now, and I think we did quite a bit. This is definitely going to require another part, probably 2 more. I like to cap the tutorials at 3 hours at the most. It's just one of those random numbers that I like. So yeah, we added, so I'm going to just take the light away a bit, just so that you can see. So definitely filled in more of the space. We still got obviously this white of the stitching that I didn't get to. But yeah, just added more depth in the leather here. You can kind of see it a lot better. And also here, starting to slowly kind of piece the areas together. This was a bit of a slow 3 hours, but that's just kind of how I work. It just is what it is. So hopefully for the next part, I'm going to start on the side and then do the stitching as well. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that. There's quite already a lot that's been done for this. So yeah, I will see you for the next one. I don't know when that will be up. I'll probably follow that same kind of how to draw, sound of drawing, big tutorial. That's kind of a nice little space out of stuff. So yeah, probably another 2 parts in this. Hopefully in the next one I can actually get a whole lot done. Because once you reach the end, it can either really pick up speed or it can slow down quite significantly, depending on what you're drawing, obviously. But I think once I've got these metal, this is probably going to take some time due to just the clustered nature of this area. It's probably going to take me a little while. And then obviously the stitching, my nemesis of repeating patterns. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Hope you have a good rest of your day wherever you are, and I'll see you for the next one. Cheers.